talk about at the end to talk about many more issues.
And we are really just preparing to be ready in case something goes bad. It might not, but probably at some point there'll be another fire near us, and we'll feel a lot more comfortable living here in beautiful Lake Wildwood if we're prepared for it. We need to ask ourselves, if there is a fire nearby, will I be home? And if I'm home, will I be aware of the fire? And if I am home, will I be prepared to grab my stuff, the right stuff, and get out in time? And if I don't know that there's a fire nearby, will my neighbors work with me and let me know to make sure I get out safely? Generally, we think, well, you know, there's a fire, I'll know about it in advance, I'll have lots of time to prepare, but that isn't what the firefighters tell us. They say, sure, that might happen, but you have to also recognize that sometimes the fire is on you very quickly and you didn't even know that it was around. Now, in the Lobo fire that was near Lake Wildwood a couple of years ago, many people didn't know that that fire actually started the night before at 10 o'clock. If I had known what I know today about how to keep informed and be aware of fire danger, I wouldn't have been caught by surprise. Most people don't seem to know that hot embers were falling in Lake Wildwood before we got up, while it was still dark, and that the firefighters told us to evacuate because if the wind hadn't stopped, the fire would have been inside of Lake Wildwood within 1 hour. So it was a serious situation, and clearly in the campfire, a lot of people died. They needed more time. The solution to all that is being prepared now, so we don't have to worry about preparing at the last minute. We aren't preparing for the house next door catching on fire. We're preparing for the worst, and this is the worst of a firestorm. In the fire in Paradise, the wind was very high, and it was taking burning embers and whole tree limbs on fire and sending them 6 miles ahead of the fire line. So we have to recognize that this is not the normal kind of fire that you have in a residential neighborhood. When they announced the campfire, I thought they were exaggerating when they said that the fire was moving 100 yards every second. And then I got out my calculator and found that 100 yards per second is only 63 miles an hour. And we've had 65-mile-an-hour winds here in Lake Wildwood, so it doesn't always move that fast, but it can, and it certainly can blow embers that fast, and we just need to be ready. We have a different situation in each part of Lake Wildwood, and in our second meeting, we're going to focus a lot on evacuation. But your situation here, this is Sun Forest Drive right here, and Sun Forest Drive, beautiful place to live. But unfortunately, the dangerous fires that have come toward Lake Wildwood have either come from the northeast, which is the windy situation that the firefighters hate the most, or in the case of the Lobo fire, it was a little bit more from the east than it was from the northeast. So you're in an area where you need to be alert to fires. You don't want to be the last one to get the word. Okay, how can we be fire safe? First, we can create a safer environment around your home and your landscaping, and we'll talk about that more later, but that really in my priorities is later, because the first thing we need to worry about is your personal safety. Your personal safety depends on knowing about dangerous fire conditions. You need to know if there's an evacuation order. And if there is an evacuation order, you need to be ready to evacuate quickly. And once you do, if you've made it that far, you need to know how to evacuate safely. And we'll spend a lot of time on that in the second meeting a couple of weeks from now. In the Lobo fire, I was so unprepared. I didn't know there was a fire nearby. A neighbor who had already evacuated woke me up asking if I wanted to grab a cup of coffee, assuming I was in Grass Valley. Well, I didn't get the order. I wasn't prepared to evacuate quickly. I grabbed all the wrong things and then ended up in a traffic jam because I didn't know the best way to pick an alternate route from my house to the gate. We're going to send you an email. I know you can't read this, very tiny print, but I'm going to refer to it multiple times throughout the presentation because this has a lot of good information on how to be prepared for fire, how to keep informed about fire, and if you do have to evacuate, how to figure out what's going on in the community. One of the first things you need to know is that there are dangerous fire conditions. Are we getting technical problems still?
No, the sound is good, but it's not, you should be a couple slides further ahead.
Oh, no, he's got a 30-second delay on that computer. Okay, all right. So one way you learn about dangerous conditions is a red flag warning, which might be posted by the gate. You might hear it on the weather forecast. There are a lot of ways you can hear about it. Weather conditions that are dangerous often are high winds, dry winds, especially from the northeast. But there was one time last year when we had a red flag warning that wasn't because of any of those things. It was because the forecast was for dry lightning, which is, I guess, a weather term for lightning strikes, but it doesn't bother to rain. Now, there's also a chance, maybe even a likelihood, that PG&E will shut off your power, and that'll tell you that it's a dangerous condition. But there was one time last year when we were under a red flag warning from the weather forecast, but PG&E did not shut off our power. It was kind of nice. They shut off the power everywhere to the east of us, but not actually in Lake Wildwood. So you need to be tuned in during these time periods to things like weather news or ubinet.com, which is on the handout that we're going to be mailing to you. Ubinet does an excellent job of keeping track of fires all over California, and they have a regional section that tells you about fires that are local. You can follow them on Twitter also, but most of us don't go that far. You know, power outages are kind of unnerving. Your normal sources of information are gone. If you have internet service, it's going to be spotty. You have no power, so you don't have Wi-Fi. You can't get connected to the internet. If you use internet off of your cell phone, it just tends to drain your battery quickly. So you should consider getting an inexpensive portable radio that runs on batteries. You can get them on the internet very inexpensively, probably a lot of places. And you could consider getting a battery backup for your cell phone. Now, on that same handout that I'm referring to again, there's a section that talks about the radio stations that we can get locally and which ones are manned at night, because some of them play recorded programming all night, and that's not the place to go to find out the latest information. When there are dangerous fire conditions, you need to be especially alert to the possibility that we'll get an evacuation order, which will be sent out primarily using Code Red. Code Red is a message that comes out from Nevada County that tells us evacuate now. It's not warning of dangerous conditions. It is saying you need to get out. And you can get that information. You can get that information on your cell phone, your regular phone, as a text message. There's lots of ways you can get it. Another way that is kind of unknown is that the Sheriff's Department has installed sirens high-low sirens in all of the sheriff's cars that are much like the sirens that you see in European movies where the police car is driving around with a really wailing siren. That siren will only be used if you should evacuate immediately. It doesn't mean you have time to try and figure out what the emergency is. It simply means you need to try and find your safest way out of Lake Wildwood. So that's something that could be very helpful for us, because the Sheriff's Department doesn't have time to go around knocking on everybody's door. Now, in that handout I mentioned, you'll see that the different ways, the different numbers you want to sign up for, so that those calls will come through on your cell phone or wherever. And you need to recognize that you need to put a different number in if you're getting text messages on your cell phone. That those come from a different number. Okay, so far you've learned that you need to find a way to know about dangerous fire conditions. And part of that and beyond that, signing up for Code Red so that you know if there's an evacuation order. But what could go wrong? Well, what could go wrong is that you didn't get the evacuation order. And there are so many ways that could happen. Code Red will not alert everyone. Maybe the messages will all go out at the same instant. Maybe they won't. Maybe some of your neighbors will get the Code Red emergency notice before you do. Many people in the Lobo fire didn't get the notice, and it was for, as you can see, a wide range of different reasons. I hate to admit it, but last night I left my phone in the living room. I've got to break that habit, because I can't hear the phone in the living room from the bedroom. So I'm working hard to develop good habits before we get any closer to the deadly fire season. The solution to making yourself safer, is to create a buddy system. It's a concept where neighbors help neighbors. That's what we've been calling neighborhood groups, although Hannah's neighborhood group is the most unusual one we've ever had, because it covers such a long, skinny geographic area, but I think it's going to work great. But the concept is that you need to form little mini groups of 3 to 5 homes with your neighbors, so that you can exchange telephone numbers and help each other know if there are dangerous fire conditions or if there is an evacuation order. In our group, the ones that we belong to, if there is a red flag warning out, I send a text message to my buddies saying, FYI, there's a red flag warning. And when we talk about evacuation, you'll hear some other things that we do to get ready. But then if we do end up getting an evacuation order, all I have to do is go back to that message and send a new message that says evacuate to that whole string of that string of neighbors. In our case, we have 5, so 4 other ones. I like text messages in an emergency. Certainly calls work good, but I think in an emergency we're going to find that the cellular carriers are, I won't say overwhelmed, but there's going to be a whole lot of phone calls going on, and text messages seem to go through even when phone calls can't. So I'm a big fan of text messages. It's the easiest, fastest, and if your neighbors don't respond, then maybe you can call them. If time permits and they are close by, you can knock on their door. We did that. If we thought we were late getting the evacuation order in the Lobo fire, but the neighbor next door was still asleep also. So it's just neighbors helping neighbors. When you form these groups, I would recommend that some of them be close by your house. They don't have to be next door. Pick neighbors you like. Pick neighbors you like to work with. Pick neighbors you can have a glass of wine with, or, you know, whatever, because it can be a fun social thing too. But and if you want to have one or two of your buddies that are in a different part of Lake Wildwood or down the street, that's not a bad idea too. I wouldn't let them be your only buddies, because you want somebody next door who might knock on your door if you didn't get the notice. But there's actually an advantage to have someone in your group that's from a different area, because then they might see something that you can't see from your home. They might be able to see that there's too much traffic, or that one of the exits isn't as safe as the others, or whatever. So there is an advantage to having multiple buddies, and some of them not in your immediate area. This concept of a buddy system is the most important single thing we're going to talk about tonight. Now, clearly, if you don't pay attention to what's dangerous, and if you don't get signed up for Code Red, that's going to really be bad. But we had a series of meetings last year called Chat with the Chief, where Don Wagner, our fire chief, came over and said a few words, and then just sat for questions. Well, somebody in one of those meetings said, "What's the most important thing I can do to be safer?" And he said, "Well, that's easy. Form a neighborhood group. If you work with your neighbors, you're going to be a whole lot safer than anything else you could possibly do." And I really believe that. Buddy system is critical because it's your personal safety that is your number one priority. Now, I'm going to talk to you about some other things that you can do to make yourself safer in the next few minutes, but you have to set priorities, and your personal safety comes first, and then some of these other things I'm going to talk about. Now, everybody knows that in the in the Camp Fire, almost every home in Paradise burned. Well, that's kind of true. But what most people don't realize is that a new fire code went into play in 2008. And if a house was built after 2008, as bad as things were in Paradise, half those houses survived. Now, Deanna and I went up there about 5 months after the fire just to see what it was like, see what we could learn from seeing the devastation in Paradise. At one point, we were driving around neighborhoods where most of the houses were gone, and we saw a gentleman standing next to his pickup truck in front of a house that was still there. So we stopped and talked to him, and it turned out that the house that was still standing, he called it a duplex. It was really two identical houses that he used as rentals, and he called them a duplex, but it really wasn't, because there was space in between the two. He said, "This one is fine." He said, "But it got so hot from the house next door burning down that the window panes on that side of the house are rippled from the glass starting to melt." But he said, "Now, other house over here that's not here anymore, I mean, it's flat, nothing there." He said, that house, the embers blew into the attic through the attic vents. And when they did, the house burned down from the inside out. Anyway, so that was that day was a tough one. It was a tough one. It was hard to see what had happened up there. But we did see that many people who had learned about defensible space or had homes that were built after the fire code change were still standing. One of the differences in the fire code, I'm kind of getting ahead of myself here, but one of the differences in the fire code is that the screening over your attic vents and foundation vents now has to be 1/8 inch, much smaller than the old code, which said 1/4 inch. and they found that with 1/8 inch screening, it's much harder for the embers to get into your house and burn it down. The other thing is that they require that there be no plants next to the house, and that there be, I've heard, a 4 feet concrete walkway all around the entire house. I haven't actually seen the code, but that's what I've been told by people who are rebuilding up there. Okay, now when you think about priorities for making your home safer, it's really important that you not try to do a whole lot at once. There are some simple things you can do. There are some things that are clearly priorities, and there are things that you might just want to do over quite a long period of time. But if you try to think about everything and do everything right away, it is simply overwhelming. So we're going to talk about some simple things, about the 5 feet next to your home, about your driveway, which is only important because that is your evacuation route, and if it's on fire, it's not going to be a pleasant experience. In the long run, you need to worry about trees that are within 30 feet of your house, and in the long run, there's a lot you can do by choosing the right plants and placing plants in the right location in your yard, and we'll talk about some of that too. Simple things: clean roofs and gutters. Well, there's a video up on the Lake Wildwood website that shows a scientific study done on why houses burn, and it was really interesting because they found that just simple little things like pine needles that blow onto your front porch, or wood piles. I moved my wood pile 30 feet away from my house, but there's a house very near me that has the wood pile underneath their deck. That is a disaster waiting to happen. When I moved my wood pile, I thought, this is oak. I have trouble getting it to light. How's it going to light in a fire? But as I started taking it apart and moving it to a new location, I found that over the year that it had been sitting there, every time I blew the leaves on the driveway, those leaves went up in between the pieces of wood. And there was so much dry kindling between those oak logs, they would have had no trouble at all getting them to light. And now they would light easily too, but at least now they're 30 feet away from my house, so I don't have to worry about it so much. Let's see, roofs and gutters, that's something we do anyway, but now this year I'm going to wait until later in the year, so I make sure all the dead leaves are off my trees before I have anybody clean my gutter, because I don't want any dead leaves up in there. Okay, after you do those simple little things, worry about 5 feet. Some of the more recent studies have shown that there are a lot of important things you can do to protect your home, but the most critical is the 5 feet next to your home. And that is especially true in neighborhoods like ours, where in many cases our homes are only 10 feet apart. So if both neighbors clean 5 feet out, then you have a good buffer that will keep things from igniting and causing your house to burn down. Plants are really tricky. Almost every shrub will burn and can catch your house on fire. I had to remove some ground cover at my house because I have wood siding, and I know that ground cover, or plants in general, the flames are about 3 times as high as the plant itself. And although my ground cover looked nice and green, looked great, underneath it, over the last several years, a lot of dry leaves have accumulated. And in the summertime, the embers would fall into those dry leaves, and the dry leaves would light the ground cover. The ground cover would light my siding. So I had to remove some of my So my ground cover. Now, the next thing is your driveway safe? Well, some really short driveways, it doesn't matter. This driveway here on the right-hand side, I can hardly see the driveway. If you can't, it's over here. That's the driveway. I would not feel comfortable trying to get out of that driveway. This driveway over here is especially bad because these are juniper plants, and juniper plants, they burn like grease. They really burn high. And these would then ignite these oak trees, which are also very close to the house. I'm going to show you other examples, but this is what the firemen call a fuse. You light the fuse anywhere out here, and it just burns right on down to the house. And here we have what's called a laddering effect, where the flames from the junipers then ignite the trees, just like going up a ladder. And these plants are on both sides of the driveway, and in fact they are very dry. This driveway is not a problem from an evacuation standpoint. It's very short. And this is a home in your neighborhood, so if you're on the call, I apologize using your house as an example, but it's nice that this house has a tile roof, probably very fire resistant, but this fuse will in fact light the front of the house, so it really won't matter how good the roof is. This is another fuse situation. This house has beautiful landscaping, very, very well maintained. But a fire that starts anywhere here, goes all the way up here, and it gets kind of dark here. I don't know if you can see it or not, but these shrubs go right up next to the stairwell and up next to the house itself. So that's kind of a dangerous situation, but not evacuation. You could probably get out of that one okay. Now this one is a contrast because here the trees are very pretty, but they don't have any limbs close to the ground. And this homeowner has low shrubs over here in this area, but none of them are tall enough that they could have the laddering effect that would get up into the trees. And there are no shrubs right here close to the driveway. There are some back over here, but they're far enough away. So, well, that's an interesting slide. Anyway, Okay, this house is an interesting example because, again, these trees, wow. Anyway, these trees don't have any limbs close to the ground, and although these shrubs are a little bit bigger than the ones you looked at before, notice how they've been spaced far apart so that if one of the shrubs catches on fire, it won't just work its way around and get down and light the ones next to it. So there are a lot of things you can do in the long run. I'm going into a lot of things like this, but remember that set your priorities and work on the simple things like leaves, work on the simple things like cleaning your gutters, keep pine needles off your porch, don't put firewood under your deck, and then work on that 5 feet. That's your first priority. Stop it. Okay, hardening your homes. This is kind of down the road, but there are a couple of simple things that you can do. One is you can take some of that 1/8-inch screening and cover your attic vents with it, and your foundation vents. And some people have used the screening underneath their decks because a lot of people catch leaves underneath their deck, which then could catch their deck on fire. We're not getting any questions, are we?
We are. There is one question from Fran Logue, and she's asking, is there a comprehensive exit evacuation plan? The one printed is very big.
Wow, good question. Yes, and you're right, it can be improved, the map can be improved. The association is currently putting together a new evacuation plan and plans to have a meeting, a town hall meeting, maybe virtually, around the end of June or probably no later than early July. So yes, there's a lot of work being done on that right now. That's the only one. Listen, I need more questions. Okay. All right. And, you know, you really ought to get, in terms of setting your priorities for what you want to do to make your home safer, you really ought to get a defensible space visit. These are advice only. They come out to your house and they go over a checklist, and after they've put together a checklist, then they explain it to you and tell you the things that you could do to improve your safety. If you don't want to do any of them, that's fine. But they also give you an opportunity to learn about some good plants and bad plants. And if you've got some bad plants, like we had a lot of rosemary at our house, and hate to admit it, but I had a fuse from the street down toward the house. And I've taken out a lot of the rosemary because it is very much like juniper plants. It really, really burns hot. So I've been removing it to stop it from bringing fire down toward the house. The association on the website has some lists of plants that are good and bad, so you can get a lot of information off the website. The website has enormous amounts of information about how to improve your fire safety. So you really ought to take advantage of that, and we'll talk more about all these things. No, you know what? In the second meeting, we're going to talk mostly about evacuation, but we'll touch on some of them in the process, I think. Okay. Well, I forgot to tell you, there's homework. You need to sign up for Code Red if you haven't already, and a lot of people have, I know. You need to find your neighborhood buddies. I personally like groups of 5, and it's mainly because at some point in time, at any point in time, there's likely to be somebody that's at work, or somebody that's traveling, or somebody that is visiting a neighbor and not home. There's just so many things that I like to have a group of 5, because then I feel like there's always one of my buddies is going to be around. And we do it in our little group. If we travel, we tell our buddies that we're traveling, so they don't come knocking on our door trying to find us when in fact we weren't even home in the first place. When you get your buddies, it's really important that you have them watch this recording. This presentation is being recorded. You'll want your buddies to attend the next meeting on evacuation, but that meeting won't be as meaningful to them if they haven't done the things that you've done, if they haven't watched this presentation, signed up for Code Red, done all the things they need to do. Then the next meeting will talk about evacuation in general, but it'll also talk very specifically about evacuation from this area, from Sun Forest Drive. Take a look, when you get that handout, take a look at some of the resources on there. I would really recommend that you take a look at the Ubinet website. Get a defensible space visit if you want to do some longer range planning, and attend the next meeting. We'll get a notice out to you. Han will get a notice out. Well, actually, excuse me. Well, yeah, probably will. Hannah probably will too, but we'll get one out from the association too. And it'll be in a couple of weeks as soon as we can get a schedule. And if you have, actually, I'll go to my last slide here. This is kind of what's going to be in the next presentation. This is one of my favorite sayings, and Hannah's the one who came up with it from somewhere. When the going gets tough, the tough get going. But the smart left a long time ago. And that's what I want you to be. That's why I want you to be the smart. I want you to be the people who are gone before you see this fire. That's all from me. See you next time.
I'd like to touch a little
Oh,
bit.
here we go.
Yep, we're not done yet. We've got, what do we got? We've got 15 minutes.
Okay.
So we will have a couple more questions to answer here. So first and foremost, I want to say that if we have any viewers that did not send an email to Jeff or myself with your address, please email your name and your address to Jeff or myself so that we can plot you on our map. We're using that map to make sure that we have accountable each person on the street. I am going to ground pound and go door to door and make sure that we have accountable each and every resident on Sun Forest. And I'll tell you why. This is all very, very important. I've been to Paradise numerous times since the campfire, as well as Concow, the place where my dog and I did canine therapy for elementary school children, and their the teachers and the principal actually lost his home as well, was Concow. The entire county was devastated. The entire area, Concow, Paradise, and that area was devastated. We've been there numerous times, and I can tell you the personal relationships with your neighbors, that communication is going to be the most important. So that's why I'm invested in this. And that's why I have a personal stake, and that's why I told Jeff from day one when he asked if I would be willing to help out with this. I said yes, and I think that I was a good candidate for this because I think that the most difficult part of neighbors talking to each other is because it's not comfortable, it's awkward, and everyone has their reasons and their whether they're shy, whether they have unknowns, whether they have previous experiences, or what have you. But when a fire tears through your community, that's not the time to meet your neighbor. When you're at work and you need someone to break down your door and rescue your pets, that's not the time to try and scramble and find your neighbor's phone number on whitepages.com. So that's why this is personal to me. When the campfire occurred, I had taken a job in Sacramento. I'm originally from Chico, Butte County, but I spent that morning watching communications on Facebook, and I watched a Paradise resident pleading on Facebook for anyone he could find to go to his apartment, because he had gone to work that morning at 5 o'clock and he had left his dog in his apartment, and he didn't have any neighbors' phone numbers. And he spent that entire time pleading for anyone to go to his apartment and get his dog. And he didn't have one phone number. And I experienced that with him. I didn't know him. And that dog was his best friend. And my dog is my best friend. And I felt that with him. So I think that's why I have also another involvement in this. I spent 6 years in the Army. And if anyone else was in the military that you've experienced, you were assigned a buddy, and you had no choice in who that buddy was. So that buddy was assigned to you whether you liked them or not, and they were usually from the other side of the earth when it came to the way you got along with each other. So we don't have to like each other. We don't have to be best friends. We don't have to have wine together. But we can get along when it comes to looking after each other to save lives, to save each other's pets, to save each other's relatives. Sun Forest has a number of folks who are cared for by hired medical personnel. I think that it's a due diligence of ours to look after them as well and make sure that they're aware that they're cared for, that somebody knows to look after them and knock on the door. in evacuations, we'll talk about keeping crates on the sides of houses, and your, I'm going to call them my Fab 4 or my Fab 3 or my Fab 5 for my buddy systems. They know to look on the side of the house. If my crates for my fur families, if my crates are out there, that means that my fur family are in the house and I'm gone. So that means please go kick down the door, do whatever you have to do, and get my fur family out. So we'll talk more about that.
Yep,
But,
sure will.
But I know the homework says that we need to get our buddy systems now, but I know not everyone on Sunforest is comfortable with talking to their neighbors. And I know that I'm guilty of it myself. So we will have a string of events. We'll have a string of conversations. If everyone could please, I know it's not the best form of communication, but if they could go to Nextdoor and join Sunforest email distribution group. It is invitation only. It's completely private. The management approves only. So you can completely ignore anything else on Nextdoor that you're not wanting to associate with. But that way we can communicate fun things, events. We can maybe do barbecues out on the street or block parties, but or meal services, ways to get to know each other so that, like I said, when a fire rips and roars, if it ever does, God forbid, that's not the time we're on whitepages.com trying to find someone's phone number to come in and rescue our loved ones or save our home. So that's my stake in this, and that's my goal. And you might warn your neighbors that somebody might be banging on their door if they're not going to participate in these meetings. We're going to be the best street in Lake Wildwood. It's my goal. I don't give up easily. So thank you for joining us. This is I know this was a heavy weekend for a lot of folks. We noticed a lot of traffic in Lake Wildwood, a lot of people. The beaches were really full. That was great to see. Saw a lot of kids running around. It was nice. It looked like a fun time in the neighborhoods. That was really cool to see. So I know there's a lot of cleanup and a lot of rest is probably taking place. So we appreciate you being here. It means a lot.
Thank you all. We'll see you in a couple of weeks. And you have about a 30-second delay over there, and I think it should, right?
Yes, I see Hannah talking.
Yeah, good.